Hello. Some more questions and comments to talk about today. Just two or three. And the first comment and question from Tejas. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. There are one or two Tejases that I've heard from. You're from India, I'm guessing. It's useful if you mention where you're from, because only out of interest, and also it gives me some idea as to your background, your understanding of the practice. It's perceived very differently by people living in Western countries, Europe, America, than it is, for instance, by people in Asian countries. But even there is quite a difference, not so much in Western countries, but between perception in, say, Northern Asian countries and Southern Asian countries, and then even more focused between, say, Burma, Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, which are very close together, but slightly different perceptions of the Dharma. But for all of us, it is the same Dharma. And how we go about practicing is up to us as individuals. And this is what we must always remember. I give you my opinions, these answers or talks, just from my own perspective and past experience, current experience, and of course also from the perspective of a Bhikkhu, a monk. That perspective, whichever country, whichever part of the world you are in, as a Bhikkhu, as a monk, isn't so different as it might be as a lay person. I hope that makes sense. Let me look at Tejas's question. I have seen in your guided meditations that you instruct us to notice spaces and silence. So my question is it necessary to focus on the breath? If I can connect directly to conscious awareness, is it necessary to come back to the breath or any other object like sound, sensations, etc.? Isn't staying in conscious awareness the aim of focusing on any object of meditation? Well, it's partly the goal, the aim. Yes. And I'm just looking at another question because I think I can answer two questions in one here. No, we'll come on to that, and then I won't necessarily need to repeat in that next question. The point of my saying notice the silence between the sounds, the space between the objects, is I'm giving guidance in meditation, a guided meditation, and also speaking aloud perhaps the commentary that I might say to myself when reminding myself as to what to be doing when sitting for meditation. Now, not so much these days do I need to do that, but if you are trying to bring your awareness to a single point, single pointed awareness of a meditation object, as opposed to concentration. Concentration implies trying hard, simply look at your face, and if you're concentrating, your muscles around your eyes, your jaw, your lips, your cheeks, your face, your forehead will tense. Those muscles will tighten in order to sharpen your focus, to increase your other senses of smelling, hearing, tasting. This is part of our hunting instinct. This is concentration. It's designed for going out and catching, shooting, killing, throwing a stone or something at our prey, if you like. This is concentration. Or even in defense, although sometimes that might, in self-defense, that concentration might fall by the wayside in terms of the panic that might occur to want you to run, which from our perspective is always the best thing to do. But in real self-defense, you learn how to maintain that focus, that concentration on your opponent, on their actions. And one way that one can do that in self-defense is by observation of their face. You can see from their eyes where they're going to hit next. You can see from their tension around their eyes, if you like, it's like drawing back the string of a bow until you finally let go and the arrow flies. This is to be seen in someone's eyes before they throw a punch. But I'm not here to talk about self-defense. That's merely an illustration of how our own bodies are working when we sit to meditate. And if you're tensing in your face, you're trying to concentrate. So if you are wanting to relax, you're wanting to meditate, thank you. You're wanting to bring your focus to that single object of meditation, this is what we must relax, but just remember this is our intention, and not try. Observe as your mind wanders, notice it thinking, where your thoughts may go to, but eventually, when you remember, come back to watching that object of meditation. However, hindrances arise. Now, as well as the 5 hindrances of sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry and doubt, there is also the aspect of, say, noise or a crowd, and this is where I'm saying bring your attention to the sound, the silence between the sounds. It is a warm-up, if you like, a warm-up before you approach the actual trying to bring your attention to the meditation object. If you simply sit and say, right, I'm going to focus on the breath, you're like drawing back the bow to fire the arrow, or getting ready to throw the first punch. And it's not that at all. So we sit and we relax our bodies, we let our minds settle naturally. Even if you sit for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, before you can really see how you're breathing and start watching the breath, that's okay. Don't force it. You're suggesting that you're going directly into conscious awareness. Well, just knowing the silence between the sounds, the space between the objects, is not really conscious awareness that we are referring to when we're looking at the stages of samadhi. So it is necessary to come back to the breath or another meditation object. That's the answer to your question, but it warrants further explanation. But you will see in an answer to I'll read the next question next, that is where we go to next with this further explanation. So I'll jump straight to that next question, because then it does really cover the two questions. Yes, so don't get carried away with the warm-up exercises. You see, eventually even the observation of the breath, when you get to the later stages of samadhi, and don't worry too much about stages and names. There are videos on here about the stages of samadhi and going into jhanas, but really don't start thinking about all of that. This is just ways we develop to try and understand what's happening, and then when we're comparing, when we're talking to our associates, our friends, our teachers, as to how we're progressing in our meditation, we have a kind of common language. All right? If you want to go from one town to another, there may be many towns or villages in between, and they'll all have names and signposts. You only need to know how to get from A to B, from one town to the other. You don't need to know the names of all the villages and the places in between. But it is a point of useful reference sometimes if you get to, say, the third town on your journey and you're stuck, you can then describe with that where you've arrived at to somebody who may be helping you. Do you see my point? We don't need to be focusing on that area. I notice in one of my replies I've spelt focus with PH. I don't know how I did that. Pretty sure it's F-O-C-U-S. Anyway, apologies for that, Tejas. So if I read your question, Creel or Savino, I know you said your name I think is Savino, not the Creel's a nickname. I may have it the wrong way around. If I read the question, you'll see where I'm going. I have a question I experience at times, like anyone else, moments of causeless happiness and love and inner joy, like for example after listening to Dharma talks like thank you, which makes my mind more pure and directed to something real and authentic. So listening to nice Dharma talks, yes, purifies your mind and makes you feel happy and inner joy. Yes, okay, I'm with you on your question. Is this happiness a temporary nirvana, and so is nirvana happiness forever or beyond time? Thank you, and many blessings. Now, okay, so we use the term nibbana in this tradition. Nothing wrong with nirvana. That tends to be used in the northern Buddhist traditions, Mahayana, which is a Sanskrit word, nirvana. Nibbana is the Pali word that we use. Literally, to translate nibbana, it translates as cooling down. I don't know the literal translation for the Sanskrit word nirvana, so I can't tell you that, but I would imagine it's something similar. However, nibbana is our overall goal. It's our final destination. And it cannot be described in words, it cannot be described in visually in any way, and it is not a place. It is a state. It is not a state of mind, because it is a state free from mind. So you see, it's difficult to... There are books and books and books about it. One very good book about it is called The Island, but it's a very detailed read with lots of quotes from suttas. Quite a tough read, I found. But even that, I can't tell you exactly what it is, because it's something that isn't of this realm for us to give comparisons to. However, what you're asking me is that joy you're experiencing, a finger snap, a glimpse of Nibbana. You see, the Buddha said you only have to have a finger snap, a glimpse of Nibbana to have experienced it, you cannot unexperience that. So you will get there again once you've experienced that finger snap of Nibbana. But what you're experiencing there is not Nibbana, even in a finger snap. And it can last a lot longer than a finger snap, this feeling. This feeling is joy. It's probably not even as far as we'd go to say in the later stages of samadhi, where you may experience what we call piti and sukha, which is physical rapture and mental joy, happiness. It's more this, enormous sense of well-being that we will get when we first sit to meditate. So this is the very early stages of samadhi, and it's actually, if anything, distracting. It's some place that some people get to, and that is good enough, and that is meditation, and that is fine. If you can sit for a long time and just experience joy and bliss through listening to a Dharma talk, but the equivalent can be the same through listening to music or watching a good feel-good movie, or even going out with friends and enjoying yourselves. These are temporary. How I describe it in a previous video recently is sticky rice and mango samadhi. It's that temporary fix. It feels good. It feels lovely. Oh yes, I've listened to a beautiful Dharma talk and now I can meditate and I feel really good. This is the very first stages of samadhi. This is entering the samadhi is like coming home, but when you get home, you go into the porchway, you put your bags down, and you go, I'm home. That's it, yes? This is this stage. And one way to describe that stage is by saying it's the feeling like when you listen to a really nice piece of music. But that's not quite the feeling of piti and sukha, but it's on the way. But it's quite a long way from a glimpse of Nibbana. So I don't want to disappoint you. It's positive that you can understand it's not just that. It's much better than that. If it was just that, it would be quite fine to just put a good bit of music on, or watch a good movie and say that's as good as meditation. Apart from, of course, meditation is a little, it's free. It doesn't, it leads on to something better. Whereas if you listen to music or watch a movie, you can only replace it by the same. And even then, however much variety you have, it's an exhaustive supply. So you cannot get satisfaction from it. And if I refer then back to Tejas, about being in that area of conscious awareness between the silence, between the sounds, and the space between the objects, you're in that entrance porch, vestibule, hall, lobby, whatever you call it, that entrance to the home we call samadhi. The inner sanctum, you're not there yet. You're just putting your bags down, you're letting go of the past and the future, and to some extent you're reducing the hindrances, those 5 hindrances. But they will come up again quite soon, and it is only a stage leading to something much better. So this is why we don't want to get stuck there in the entrance porch, because it soon will, eventually at least, get boring. So we go back to our meditation object. So for you, Tejas, you have to, yes, come back to the breath, or whatever your meditation object is. And for you, Kriel, we're not there yet. It is authentic happiness. You're listening to Dharma, it's making you feel good, but it isn't Nibbana. And it doesn't last forever, because you, like a piece of music, you can't listen to the same piece of music over and over again and it will bring you to the same place. If you listen to whomever's Dharma talk, the same one, over and over again, even that is soon going to get boring. But if you just watch the breath, it will be boring at first, but it's the reverse. It gets more and more interesting until eventually even that dissolves of its own accord. And then you are left in that senseless realm where there are eventually none of those 5 hindrances. And physical feelings are gone. Mental emotions, thought will also be gone. And that is always moving towards Nibbana. I'm not saying that is Nibbana, but that is getting towards Nibbana. So hopefully that answers both your questions, and thank you for those good questions. So to both of you, if you haven't watched Sticky Rice Samadhi, watch Sticky Rice Samadhi, because it's explaining really that. Okay, now this is a comment about 2 questions, comments. So from Ebert Upatissa. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Ebert. You write often, so I've seen the name often, but I've not said it out loud. Hope you can in future videos perhaps explain in point forms some important and significant events related on each full moon day to the Buddha's life and the Dharma. Oh, yeah, happily. So the excuse me, I'm not going to make a whole video about this, although you could. And there is, oh no, it's on another thing. I did make a video all about just one of those days, and that went on for about an hour. But anyway, let's get to the point. You say point form. Like in Christianity, with the Christian calendar, they have religious holidays like Christmas and Easter and Lent, and I'm not really sure as to when that starts and when it finishes and how it works, but let's say there's Christmas, Easter and Lent, and they are specific days, common I think throughout most Christian variations on that religion. But they also have saints' days, so more or less every day of the 365 days of the calendar has a different saint's day, and say dependent on which section of Christianity you are, they put more emphasis on certain days than other. So I suppose if you're a Franciscan monk, they'd be really up and big on St. Francis's Day, for instance, for celebration, and so with the people that, I don't know how it works with them, come to their monastery. Yes? That's just an example. And the same with Buddhism. What it is we have, as I mentioned, every 15 days, the full moon and the new moon, when we call it the Uposatha, or in Thailand it's one pra, which is holy day, and it's like the Buddhist equivalent of the Sabbath, let's say. So it doesn't matter which day of the week it falls, like Christmas, and Easter, but it's done on the moon cycle, so the full moon and new moon. And there are approximately, let's say, 12 or 24 if you include both new moon and full moon. And also in Thailand they treat the half moons, the quarter moons if you like, the half moons on the way to the full moon and on the way back down to the new moon. But just taking the full moons and new moons, each of those days also in the Buddhist calendar has particular reference to, you're asking me to explain these events related to the Buddha's life and the Dharma. Well, yeah, each one has some reference to the suttas and a stage in the Buddha's advancement, his life, and the Dharma. But in this tradition, my tradition, Theravada, and this particular Thai Forest tradition, but I think most of the Theravada, southern schools of Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, really only relates to 4 main days. So like the 4 main days which are common throughout most Buddhist variations, like Christianity has Christmas, Easter and Lent, we also have 4 like Christmases, Easter and Lent. So the first is coming soon, called Magha Puja. And Magha Puja is the full moon of March. And this we also call, I suppose, in English, Sangha Day. It is a day to celebrate the Sangha. This is the body of monks, if you like. But it commemorates the occasion that the Buddha brought, and this is in calendar order, not the order of the Buddha's life. I'm just going through the calendar because we've got one coming up and I'm starting in March, and there's only 4, so it's easy to work it out. This commemorates the occasion when the Buddha arranged, they had no way of doing this in those days, so it happened kind of telepathically, we think, for 1,250 bhikkhus to attend a talk of his. It's called the Fire Sermon. It's the 4th of the 4 cardinal, the main suttas. Rajagir, vultures, Rajagir in near, not far from Bodh Gaya, in Bihar, North India, to Vulture's Peak, where they congregated, and he gave this talk, and they all became arahants. And you can Google Magha Puja and it will tell you all about it. But this is the first of the year main holy Buddhist holy days. So that's the first one. Now up to then, we've just had one recently. For instance, February, you could say in February that was we celebrate, but we don't particularly in this tradition, the Theravada Patimokkha. So that was and Sariputta and Mangalana, his main disciples' ordination, and supposedly the time that he announced that in 3 months' time that he would be going to parinibbana, so dying. Now you've got all these occasions, and they're all attributed to full moons and new moons. Now the likelihood of all of these things happening on full moons and new moons is pretty slim. Albeit they would have all been congregating for their Uposatha meetings at those times. So there is that to bear in mind. But it is really just a convenient way of some traditions who want to really, I don't know, each month focus on a different area of the Dharma, as in the Buddha's life and the scriptures, a little bit like they do in the Christian, which is why I'm comparing it to Christianity. They do this in the Christian church, so that each Sunday they've got a new theme, and it goes on a rotational basis throughout over a few years, if you like, so that they never have to think about what to talk about. It covers the entire Bible, or however it works. It's quite a good formula, I suppose, a structure for their sermons, their themes and their talks, but they all lead up to the main Christian festivals. But in our tradition we don't do that. It's about practice in our tradition, and we just, if you like, celebrate, or the lay people like to celebrate by all coming together at the monasteries on the 4 main days. So that's why I'm just talking about those. So Magha Puja is Sangha Day, and that's what it's commemorating, the fire sermon really, and the Buddha giving that fire sermon, which is also a very, very good sutta. So that's one you can look at. the next one will be then the full moon of May, which is Vesak. Vesak is spelled V-E-S-A-K. This is the celebration of the Buddha's birth, the day of his enlightenment, and his death. So you see what I'm saying? The likelihood of it being that day in reality is quite slim, but it's done as we don't know the day that this happened in the year, so it's a convenient day to celebrate them all together. And I'm not going to give you a whole talk as to why it's appropriate to celebrate them all together, but that is the main Buddhist holiday, the main Buddhist festival. That's like Buddhist Christmas. But it's like Buddhist Christmas and Easter all wrapped into one, because it really does have worldwide significance, and in all traditions it is the one that's commonly celebrated in a big way. Vesak, the full moon of May. The next one is Asala Puja. Now Asala Puja is Dharma Day, and this is the beginning of the Vasa, the 3-month period when monks stay in one place, the monsoon time in these countries, in Asian countries, from India through here to Thailand, and probably further east, I'm not so sure, but it's raining for 3 months, so we stay in one place. And that is the beginning, Asala Puja, of our rains retreat. It's called Dharma Day. It's called Dharma Day because it also commemorates the day after the full moon of May, when the Buddha became enlightened, because we celebrate, don't forget, birth, enlightenment and death on the full moon of May, Vesak. After that, he then travelled, he walked, so it took a long time. Specifically, if it happened on these days, you see, is unlikely, to Sarnath, which is quite some distance from, I think, about 600 kilometres from, maybe 300 kilometres from Varanasi or Bodh Gaya. So he walked to Sarnath, where he gave the Dhammacakka Sutta, the turning of the wheel, the first discourse on the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. He taught this to his 5 fellow ascetics, who then became his disciples, in Sarnath at the deer park. This is the commemoration of that day, Asala Puja, so it's very significant. And at the end of the 3 months comes on the full moon of, so that is the full moon of July, sorry, I should say, usually. Now, because the full lunar calendar is slightly different to the ordinary calendar, it's, as long as I've known it, it's always been the full moon of July, but this year, because of the way the full moons come and go, they're not based on the Gregorian calendar that we use nowadays in most countries. The moon just does its thing every 15 days. Sometimes it's 14 days, but that's only occasionally. But the this year it's the full moon, or first full moon of August, which means there'll be 2 full moons in August, I think, but and maybe one left, not one in July, but the first full moon, there has to be one in July. Anyway, for some reason this year it's the full moon of August that Asala Puja will be celebrated. I think it's the 4th of August. I know this because that's when I have to be in one place for the next 3 months, so I have to always have that date in mind, because if I'm travelling or something and I'm not able to get, like last year I was in England right up until the day before the full moon of July, and I had to get to India, and then from where I landed in India, in Bangalore, get to the place where I was to spend the Vasa. So 2 days before, sorry, I had to get on a plane, get to Bangalore in India, South India, and then they had to get me there to my vihara, where I stayed for 3 months. It's very important. If I hadn't made it, got that plane, I would have had to have stayed in the monastery in England, which would have been nice also. It's a nice time of year, but they didn't necessarily have room, and I hadn't arranged that with them. So that's Asala Puja, full moon of July usually, and then we call it also Dharma Day. so you've got Sangha Day, Marga Puja, Sangha Day, Wesak, which is sometimes called Buddha Day, not to be confused with Bodhi Day, which is nothing to do with Theravada tradition and comes later in the year, so I'm not going to talk about that. And then Asala Puja, which is Dharma Day, and then at the end of that 3 months, which is usually the full moon of October, we have Parvarana. Parvarana is like Buddhist Lent, but this is really for the monks. It's the end of that Vasa, and each and every bhikkhu comes to the Sangha and confesses any wrongdoings of body, speech and mind that they may have done during that Vasa period, that 3-month period. So 4 days: Magha Puja, Sangha Day; Wesak, Buddha Day; Asala Puja, Dharma Day; and Parvarana is really Monk's Day, is Buddhist Lent. They are the 4 days. But around that Buddhist Lent, Parvarana, usually a few days or even a couple, up to 1 month after that, up until the full moon of November, each and every monastery that has had monks more than has had a monk stay there for that 3 months will celebrate its Katina festival, which is what the lay people do to celebrate that day. Now, because there are so many monasteries to be doing this, and some of them are quite close to each other, there's a whole month to do it, so that if there's a few nearby, they can do it on separate weekends. But this is when the lay people come and offer cloth or robes. It used to always be cloth to the monastics, the monks, for them to then continue their practice for the rest of the year traditionally. But it's more a ceremony now, and a day for them all to come together and celebrate. So I was the only monk staying where I was, so we had a Katina festival. It was quite low-key, small. They presented me with a Katina cloth, which was new robes, which then you accept, and then they are your new robes. There's a certain ceremony you have to do. There have to be more than 4 monks present, like all of these things, including yourself. So I had other monks come to the monastery, and we did this formal gathering and ceremony of Katina cloth being offered, and there we are. Now I'm here, and the next thing coming up would be Magha Puja. Yes, that's it, that's the 4. So Ebba, they're the only 4 I'm going to talk about. We don't, all of the others, we do not even talk about them in this tradition. They each, every month, every lunar full moon and new moon, there are for different traditions, different days they celebrate. There's something in November, I think it's around the 15th of November, which you hear about now, more so in the West, called Bodhi Day. But that really comes from one of the Japanese traditions, and I don't know anything about it or where it comes from or why. So I heard it a lot this year, so it's big, I think, because they're putting it on the news where various things are happening in different places, towns in the West. They're using it as something to cover as some cultural celebrations in different cities around the world. But it was new to me. Someone said, "Happy Bodhi Day." I said, "Oh, is it?" I thought they were talking about the tree, the Bodhi tree, which would make sense. But no, it's their version of Buddha Day. But that for us is Wesak, the date of Buddha's birth in Lumbini, Nepal, and his enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, Bihar, North India, and his death in Kushinagar, also in Bihar, North India, his parinibbana, his passing away, death of this worldly life into final nibbana, never to be reborn. So, well, I hope that explains those 4 days. And you have another question, but I won't be able to answer that. Can you in future? Sorry, Ebba, find the question. You're asking that I can talk a little bit about, well, it would be a lot actually, about rebirth. I'll make a whole talk about rebirth soon, because there have been some questions, debates on this in some recent conversations I've had, so I'll happily just discuss the Buddhist and my perspective on rebirth in due course. But for now, was that another question? Sorry, just check. Oh no, for now that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you continue to be or are happy and well. Bye bye.